Something shifts when you stop being available, not disappearing completely, but becoming unpredictable in a way that makes someone's mind work differently around you. You've felt it before. That moment when someone becomes different, less predictable, less available, less certain, and your brain starts paying attention in a way it never did before. The thing is, you've been approaching this backwards, trying to make someone miss you by being more present, more available, more eager to respond. Like showing up more will somehow make them want you more. But missing isn't about presence. It's about absence that feels meaningful. Here's what happens in the mind when someone becomes predictable. They fade into background noise, always there when needed, always responding when called, always eager to give attention. The brain stops registering them as important because, why would it? They're not going anywhere. You become like breathing, essential maybe, but not something anyone thinks about. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine being someone whose attention feels limited, whose availability isn't guaranteed, whose responses come when they come, not when expected. Suddenly, that person becomes interesting. There's a psychological principle that governs this completely. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The uncertainty, the not knowing when the reward will come. But here's where most people mess this up catastrophically. They think this means playing games, being cold, pretending not to care. That's not what this is about. This is about understanding something deeper about human psychology, about how the mind assigns value, about why scarcity creates desire and abundance kills it. The method has 4 specific steps. Each one goes against every instinct you have about relationships and connection. Each one will feel wrong, selfish, maybe even cruel when you first try it. But when someone starts wondering why you're different now, when they begin reaching out first, when they start asking questions they never asked before, you'll understand why this works when everything else fails, because the secret isn't in what you do to make them miss you, it's in what you stop doing. And there's one thing in particular that, the moment you stop doing it, changes everything between you and them forever. The mistake has a name, even though most people don't recognize it when they're making it. Emotional availability overflow. You give your emotional energy before it's asked for. You offer comfort before someone expresses need. You provide reassurance before uncertainty is even voiced. You make yourself emotionally available in moments when that availability isn't being sought. And the person receiving this overflow? Their brain categorizes you as solved, as handled, as emotionally predictable. You think you're being caring, attentive, connected, but what you're actually doing is eliminating mystery. Here's something that will make you uncomfortable. The people who miss you most intensely are the ones who can't quite figure out how you feel about them. Not because you're cruel or distant, but because you haven't made your emotional state their certainty. Think about the difference between hunger and satisfaction. When you're hungry, food consumes your thoughts. You plan around it, anticipate it, crave it. But the moment you're full, food becomes irrelevant. Background. Something you'll think about later. Emotional availability works the same way. When someone always knows they can access your emotional energy, your care, your attention, you become emotionally irrelevant. Not because you matter less, but because you're not creating any emotional tension that needs to be resolved. You've made yourself emotionally predictable, and the human mind doesn't obsess over what it can predict. So here's what most people do wrong. They try to create closeness through constant emotional availability. They share everything, respond to everything, care about everything the other person experiences. They think this creates connection, but connection isn't built through constant emotional presence. It's built through moments of emotional presence that feel chosen, intentional, not automatic. When your emotional availability becomes automatic, it stops feeling special, it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a given, and you can't miss what feels like a given. But here's where this gets interesting. The moment you start creating some uncertainty around your emotional availability, something shifts in how they think about you. They start noticing when you're emotionally present in ways they never did before, because suddenly Your emotional attention feels like something that might not always be there. Step 1. Create space, not disappear. Step 1 sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing you'll ever do in a relationship. Stop filling every silence. Not because you're trying to be distant, not because you're playing a game, but because constant presence eliminates the possibility of absence, and you cannot miss what never goes away. Here's what creating space actually means. It means not being the one who always initiates, not being the one who always responds first, not being the one who always has something to say when the conversation naturally pauses. It means letting moments exist without your input. This feels wrong because you've been taught that caring means constant engagement. That interest means immediate response. That connection requires continuous contact. But think about it differently. When someone is always talking, when do you get a chance to miss their voice? When someone always reaches out first, when do you get the opportunity to reach out to them? Space isn't rejection. Space is opportunity. The space for them to notice your absence. The space for them to wonder what you're doing. The space for them to be the one who initiates for once. But here's where most people sabotage themselves. They create space, then fill it immediately. They wait an hour, then send a message explaining why they waited. They pull back, then push forward twice as hard to make up for the distance. That's not creating space, that's creating chaos. Real space is consistent. It's a new pattern, not a temporary withdrawal. So what does this look like practically? It means when they share something with you, you don't always have an immediate response. You take time to actually think before you react. Not to punish them, but because thoughtful responses are more valuable than instant ones. It means you don't always be the one checking in. You don't always be the one asking how their day was. You don't always be the one keeping the conversation alive. It means you start having a life that exists independently of your connection with them. And this is crucial. Creating space only works if the space is filled with something meaningful. If you're just sitting around thinking about them while pretending to be busy, they'll sense the emptiness of your absence. But if you're genuinely engaged in your own life, your own interest, your own growth, the space you create carries weight. It feels substantial. It makes them curious about what's filling that space. Because here's what happens when you stop being constantly available. They start to value the times when you are available. Your presence starts to feel like a choice instead of a default. Step 2. Shift your energy. Energy is everything, and right now your energy is pointed in the wrong direction. Your emotional energy, your mental energy, your attention, it's all flowing toward them, constantly, like a river that only flows one way. But energy that flows in only one direction creates an imbalance, and imbalanced relationships don't create longing, they create dependency on one side and indifference on the other. Step 2 is about redirecting that energy back toward yourself. Not out of spite, not to hurt them, but because when your energy is focused on your own life, your own growth, your own experiences, it creates a gravitational pull that others feel. Think about the people who fascinate you most. Are they the ones who seem completely focused on you? Or are they the ones who seem deeply engaged with their own lives, their own passions, their own mysteries? People are drawn to energy that's self-contained, to lives that feel full and interesting and separate from their own. So here's what shifting your energy actually means. Stop monitoring their social media. Stop analyzing their responses. Stop crafting perfect messages. Stop trying to decode every interaction. Instead, start paying attention to yourself with the same intensity you've been paying attention to them. What do you want to learn? What do you want to create? What experiences do you want to have that have nothing to do with them? This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming interesting. When your energy is focused on your own life, several things happen. First, you stop being needy, not because you're pretending not to need anything, but because you're actually fulfilling your own needs. Second, you become genuinely busy. Not fake busy, where you're just pretending to have plans. Actually busy with things that matter to you. And third, you start developing stories, experiences, and perspectives that are entirely your own. You become someone with something to share rather than someone looking for something to receive. But here's the most important part. This energy shift has to be real. You can't fake being interested in your own life. You can't pretend to be fulfilled while secretly obsessing over them. They'll sense the authenticity of your energy shift. And if it's real, if you're genuinely more focused on yourself than on them, something interesting happens. They start wondering why. They start noticing that your attention isn't automatically available, that your energy isn't constantly directed toward them, that you've become harder to read. And that uncertainty, that's where missing begins. Step 3. Become unpredictable. Predictability is the death of desire. When someone can anticipate your every response, predict your every move, expect your every reaction, you become emotionally invisible to them. Their brain stops paying attention because there's nothing left to figure out. Step 3 is about strategic unpredictability, not chaos, not inconsistency for its own sake, but breaking the patterns that have made you emotionally predictable. Here's what most people don't realize. You've trained the people in your life to expect certain things from you, always available, always agreeable, always the same emotional temperature, always responding in the same time frame, always interested in the same things. You've become a known quantity, but the human mind is wired to pay attention to pattern breaks, to things that don't fit the expected model, to surprises, even small ones. So what does strategic unpredictability look like? If you always respond immediately, sometimes take time to respond. If you always agree, sometimes offer a different perspective. If you're always emotionally available, sometimes be engaged with something else entirely. If you always ask about their day, sometimes share something about yours first. If you always make plans around their schedule, sometimes have your own plans that can't be moved. This isn't about being difficult. It's about being human. Real people have varying moods, different priorities on different days, changing interests, evolving perspectives. Real people aren't always the same emotional temperature, but somewhere along the way, you decided to be consistently one thing, consistently available, consistently agreeable, consistently predictable. And predictable people fade into the background of someone's daily experience. Here's what happens when you become strategically unpredictable. Their brain starts paying attention again. They start actually thinking about your responses instead of assuming them. They start wondering what you're thinking instead of believing they already know. You become interesting again. But here's the crucial part. Unpredictability only works if it feels authentic. If it seems like you're just randomly changing your behavior to get a reaction, it backfires completely. The unpredictability has to come from genuine changes in your life, your interests, your priorities. It has to reflect real growth, real experiences, real evolution in who you are. Because what you're really doing isn't trying to confuse them. You're allowing them to see that you're a complete person with depth and complexity and the capacity to surprise them. And people miss what they can't fully understand. Step 4. The quality over quantity rule. This is where everything comes together. You've created space. You've shifted your energy. You've become unpredictable. Now comes the most important part. When you do engage, when you do connect, when you do interact, it has to be exceptional. Quality over quantity isn't just about relationships. It's about how the human brain assigns value to anything. A rare diamond is precious. Common stones are ignored. The same principle applies to your attention, your time, your emotional energy. When you were constantly available, your attention had no scarcity value. It was common, expected, taken for granted. But now that your attention is less frequent, each moment of connection carries more weight. Here's what this means practically. When you do respond, make it count. When you do spend time together, be fully present. When you do engage in conversation, bring your full self to it. No half-hearted responses, no distracted attention, no going through the motions. If you're going to be less available, the times when you are available need to be memorable. This is where most people mess up the entire process. They create space, shift their energy, become unpredictable. But then when they do connect, it's mediocre, forgettable, just like it was before. That doesn't make someone miss you. That just makes them wonder why you're being weird. But when your reduced availability is combined with exceptional presence, when the rare moments of connection are genuinely meaningful, something powerful happens. They start to associate you with quality experiences, with conversations that matter, with attention that feels valuable because it's not constantly available. You become worth waiting for. Here's how to make every interaction count. Be genuinely curious about them when you engage. Ask questions you actually want to know the answers to. Share thoughts that are actually worth sharing. Be present in a way that makes them feel like the only person in the world during that moment. Not because you're performing, but because you've become someone who values quality interaction over constant contact. The goal isn't to have less connection. The goal is to have better connection. And when someone experiences better connection with you, but less frequently, they start to crave more of that quality. They start to miss not just you, but the version of themselves they are when they're with you. Here's what you need to know about timing. This doesn't work immediately. In fact, the first thing that happens when you start this process is usually nothing. Or worse, they might seem less interested at first. That's normal. That's part of the process. When you stop being constantly available, their first reaction isn't to miss you, it's to not notice, because they've been taking your availability for granted for so long that its absence doesn't immediately register. But then, something shifts, usually within a few weeks. They start to notice that something is different, that you're different, that the dynamic between you has changed in ways they can't quite identify. They might start reaching out more, or asking questions they didn't ask before, or seeming more interested in your responses when you do respond. But here's where most people sabotage themselves. The moment they see any sign that it's working, they revert back to their old patterns. They get excited and flood the person with attention again. Don't do this. The process works because of consistency, not intensity. If you create space for 2 weeks and then go back to constant availability, you've taught them that your unavailability was temporary, that if they just wait, you'll go back to being predictable. Another common mistake, taking this too far, becoming genuinely distant or cold, creating so much space that you disappear entirely, being so unpredictable that you seem unstable. This isn't about becoming unavailable, it's about becoming selectively available. There's a difference between being mysterious and being absent, between being unpredictable and being unreliable, between creating healthy space and creating walls. The goal is to become someone whose attention feels valuable, not someone whose attention feels impossible to get. And here's perhaps the most important thing to understand. This process changes you, not just them. When you start focusing on your own life, you actually become more interesting. When you create space, you start to value your own time differently. When you become unpredictable, you start to embrace your own complexity. You're not just trying to make someone miss you, you're becoming someone worth missing. But there's one final thing you need to know, one reality about this process that no one wants to talk about. Sometimes, making someone miss you reveals something you weren't prepared to discover. That they're capable of missing you, but not capable of loving you the way you want to be loved. That they can want your attention without wanting you. That missing someone and valuing someone are not the same thing. This process works because it's based on fundamental psychological principles. Scarcity creates value, uncertainty creates attention, mystery creates fascination. But here's what it can't do. It can't make someone love you who doesn't. It can't make someone choose you who isn't ready to choose anyone. It can't fix problems that go deeper than availability and attention. What it can do is show you the truth about where you stand with someone. If they miss you when you create space, if they pursue you when you step back, if they value you more when you're less available, that tells you something important about their capacity for connection with you. But if they don't notice your absence, if they don't pursue when you step back, if they seem relieved rather than curious about your new unavailability, that tells you something important too. Either way, you win because you discover the reality of the situation instead of living in the fantasy of what you hoped it could be. And you become someone who values their own time, their own energy, their own presence. Someone whose attention feels valuable because they've learned to value it themselves. You cannot make someone miss something they never learned to value, but you can stop devaluing yourself by being constantly available to people who don't appreciate your availability. You can stop filling every silence, answering every call, being the solution to every moment of their boredom or loneliness. You can start being someone whose presence feels like a gift rather than a guarantee. And if they miss you when you create that space, if they pursue you when you step back, if they start to see your value when it's not constantly on display, then you'll know you've found someone worth your carefully guarded attention. But if they don't, if your absence goes unnoticed, if they seem content with less of you rather than curious about more, then you'll know something even more valuable, that your energy was being wasted on someone who never learned to miss what they had. And that awareness, that's not a loss, that's freedom. The freedom to find someone who doesn't need you to disappear to realize you're worth keeping around.